Hello, and welcome to the Accountability Coach podcast, where we discuss proven business success principles related to helping you make more money and work less so you can enjoy having your ideal business and ideal life. This is Bachrach. Today, we have a special guest with us who I think you will find to be extremely knowledgeable in helping us be even better communicators so we can be even more effective in our business and personal lives. Alain Hunkins helps high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. Over his 20-year career, Alain has worked with over 2,000 groups of leaders in 25 countries. Some of his clients include Wal-Mart, Pfizer, Citigroup, General Electric, State Farm Insurance, IBM, General Motors, and even Microsoft. Alain is the author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. A faculty member of Duke Corporate Education, Alain's writing has been featured in Fast Company, Forbes, Chief Executive, Chief Learning Officer, and Business Insider. Welcome, Alain. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Well, let's get right into it. Why is communication a skill that every business owner should and really needs to work on consistently to improve?
Oh, great question. So here's the thing. I know we have lots of small business owners listening out there, and you could be working in all sorts of industries. But the fact is, whether it's, let's say it's customer service, it's a retail, high tech, pharmaceutical, whatever your business is, we're all in the people business. And so understanding that unless you're planning to work completely on your own, which is impossible because even dealing with customers, the fact is you're going to need to communicate what's in your head into somebody else to get it in their head. And the goal of that is to create as 100% accurate a picture as possible, which we all know is easier said than done. And so if you as a business owner can get better at understanding that there are certain things that are going to trip you up, and so it's going to make communication vague and muddy, and there are other things that will make for more clarity, then for example, one thing is every time you start a meeting is, do you give people the big picture, such as, so the purpose of our meeting is this, right, X, Y, Z. Now, when I ask people, how many of you love when other people start a meeting with the big picture first? Everyone goes, oh, of course I love it because it gives me clarity and context. It kind of gives a frame of what we're doing and what's inside the frame, what's not inside the frame. Great. I'm glad you all love it. How many of you start every single one of your meetings by giving the big picture first? And like, oh, I don't. Like, why don't you? Because it's already clear in your own head. Like, yeah, but the meeting's not about you. It's about getting it into the other person's head. So it's just a simple thing. I'll give the big picture first. And another thing to consider when you're coming up with your big picture is, can you distill it down and make it so clear that you have a central message that is no more than 5 to 7 words? That's it. Because other than that, people are not going to track with you. So, yeah, we could talk about communication here for days, but that's just a couple of tools to think about, like big picture, giving a clear central message, because ultimately the reason that communication is so important is the fact is none of us communicate for communication's sake. We communicate because what we're trying to achieve, the goal of communication, is this accurate and shared mutual understanding. And the reason that is so important is because understanding becomes the platform on which we all stand to take any future action. So if we have a solid foundation to stand on, we can make some really good actions, make some good decisions, which will lead to great results. However, if the platform that we're standing on is tippy and wobbly because we're not quite clear, we're exactly sure what we're talking about and where we're going with this, we're going to make some poor decisions. We're going to end up with some poor results. So it all comes back to creating understanding, and by just being passionate, actively engaged with making sure that understanding is your goal in all of your communication.
You said a couple of really important things here, Alain, and I really liked it. You said, starting the meeting, the purpose of the meeting is. And I think that is so important for people to really set the stage properly instead of just starting with whatever words come out of their mouth, right?
Yeah, item A on a laundry list, right? Yeah, exactly.
And then, the other aspect of that is really creating, you talked about, the big picture. Now, let me ask you this as it relates to that. How do you create, because we've always heard, hey, a picture is worth 1,000 words, which is true, right? Because most people are visual. So the purpose of the meeting is and really create a big picture visually in people's minds to help them understand the purpose of the meeting?
Great question. So it really depends on how familiar your, we'll call it the audience, whoever's coming to the meeting, is with your topic that you're trying to get across. The fact is you're going to have to think about who your stakeholders are. What is the agenda? Not your agenda, but their agenda. What are they trying to do? Are they just getting familiar with this? Are you trying to educate them, inform them? Do you want them to be part of the decision-making process? Are you trying to sell something to them? In which case you have to think about what are the benefits to them versus trying to sell features, etc. So I think it's just getting really clear on what is their agenda and then figuring out, and this, by the way, isn't something that you get right the first time. You have to think about the big picture and write it out, and that'll be your first draft. And that anyone who's ever done any writing knows that the devil is in the details of revision. So, show it to somebody else. Like, is this clear? Does this make sense? And then clarify it and tighten it up and get rid of the stuff that isn't really helping you. Ultimately, the goal is to come up with something that is so clear and compelling that people go, I want to listen, I want to engage, I want to be a part of this.
So true. You also said something really important there. I'm queuing in on all these important things that you're saying, so hopefully everybody's getting it as well. You talked about, getting clear and really writing it out. And so many times we don't write it out to really think about it. And I've heard that when you do write something out, take out so many words because you really don't need all the words that you've written. Is that true?
Oh my gosh, completely true. I mean, the fact is, for my money, writing is one of the most powerful ways to clarify your thinking. Because, you have all these ideas in your head and you kind of get it, but it's one thing to get it. It's another thing to have to actually put it into words, into writing, where it is, if you write with pen and paper, it is there for the test of time. And then obviously you can revise, but what it does is it sharpens your thinking. And I tell you, the more that you practice that, the clearer your thinking becomes. And also it starts to transfer over from your writing to your ability to speak extemporaneously and creating clarity of thought. Because, and one of the best ways, by the way, to become a clear writer is to read really good writing. Because the fact is, it's really challenging to think really straight. So that is something, I would definitely say writing is so good. It has definitely sharpened my thinking. I mean, I wrote a book that was published in 2020, right? And so, and I would recommend also, don't just read people's, social media posts, but if you go and read a book, so for example, if you read my book, you're getting the benefit, and you can read a book in a few hours. You're getting the benefit of someone probably poured years of their life into crafting that. So really reading good writing can help you to sharpen your own ability to think clearly and then turn around and write, which will in turn, it's a cycle and a spiral. And the more that you do it, the better at it you get. So yes, write away and you'll be a better thinker for sure.
And then what would be the statistic, if you know this, because I don't remember this? So once you've written everything that you want down, people always talk about, hey, take this percent out, and then you've really got the content that you're looking for.
Oh, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's high. I mean, and this is the thing is most of us, in fact, I'll share a little story about this. So one of my friends, her mother was a professor of history at Princeton University. And one of her final assignments for her history class was for the folks to write a 3-page paper. And one of her students handed in the paper. And on the front, there was a Post-it note. And it said, Dear Professor LeBaum, I'm sorry I'm handing in this 6-page paper. I didn't have time to make it 3. Right? If you stop and think about it, that almost sounds counterintuitive. Like, wait a minute, shouldn't 6 pages take twice as long as 3? No, not at all. It actually, the work is in the editing, because what you're doing in the editing process is you're distilling your thoughts for clarity. You're getting rid of all the things that get in the way of someone tracking along and having the insight that you want them to have. And the fact is, our first, second, third drafts are not going to do that. And so we have to do this refining. And sometimes, and this is the challenge, I think, in that process, is sometimes the parts that you have to edit, you're really emotionally attached to. It's like, oh, but I wrote this, right? You've got to let go of your ego and realize you're actually creating something better by making it smaller and tighter than the whole big thing. So yeah, I don't know what the percentage is, but definitely you're going to be removing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I don't remember, but I remember it being a big number. And I was actually talking to Perry Marshall, who had written a book that he wrote I can't remember like 50 pages. And the person editing it basically said, look, we got to cut this down to like 10 pages. And he was, well, wait a minute. All this is good material. But really, when you condense it, you become more effective at really delivering the exact message you want. And I think obviously that's super important and leads to my next question, which is, what is or really should be the goal of effective communication? So in other words, how do we measure how well we're communicating or not communicating?
Yeah, I think great question. So in terms of the goal, again, if we go into the goal of communication is ultimately understanding so people can make decisions and get results. But the thing is, we can't just communicate and throw things out to the ether because we don't know how it's landed. So one of the things that I highly recommend, and I'll teach another tool here to everybody, is you want to make sure, think of communication like, here's an analogy for you. If you're playing baseball, the game of catch, right? So you throw the ball out. That's like communicating out, right? I'm telling you this, but then you've got the ball. But the thing is, for communication to be complete, I need you to confirm your understanding of it. And that means throwing the ball back to me. And another analogy I use for around this is this idea of you want to ask for a receipt of understanding. If you think about what is a receipt, when you go to the store and they give you a receipt, it is a confirmation of a complete transaction. And the fact is, in life, the more important the transaction, the more likely you're going to ask for a receipt. So for example, if you go to the local 7-Eleven and get a pack of gum for 75 cents, do you want a receipt? No, I'm good with that. But I can guarantee you no one on this listening to this right now would buy a house without getting a receipt, right? No, buy a car without getting a receipt because the stakes are high. You want to make sure you have confirmation of that. So it's interesting. This whole idea of the power of receipt is a really good story that comes actually out of the fast food industry. I don't know if you remember, Ann, but back in the 1980s is when all the fast food stores, restaurants started putting in drive-throughs. And when they first started the process of putting drive-throughs into fast food restaurants, the process was terrible. What would happen is people would go up to the intercom and they'd place their order and they'd show up to the window to pick up their food, and the order would be filled with mistakes. And this was consistent across every single restaurant for quite some time. And it was really a sticking point. And yet, suddenly, drive-through mistake rates suddenly started to plummet. And you might be wondering, well, what did they change? What new technology did they bring in to make it happen? It was actually super simple. What they ended up doing is they realized that after customers would put their order through the intercom, what they added was an additional step, which was for the employee to read the order back to the customer. So let's say you were at, we'll call it Burger King, and you said, I want to order 2 Whoppers, 2 French fries, and 2 Coca-Colas. The employee would say, all right, that's 2 Whoppers, 2 French fries, 2 Coca-Colas. Is that right? Yes. Well, surprise, surprise. They show up to the window, and guess what they get? Exactly what you ordered. And so think about that. That is just basically a simple confirmation that what you said is the same as what you meant, is the same as what I heard. And if you get all those 3 things together, you've got understanding. And if you don't, you don't. And so think about how often do we have business meetings where we all discuss a bunch of stuff and then we're at, okay, everyone's clear on what we're doing, right? Good. But we never stop to confirm, take that extra 5 or 10 minutes to go, hey, let's do an ask for receipt, or let's just check around. What is everyone taking away from this? Can we just go through? Because I'm sure many of us have had the experience of when you don't do that, and people are a bit on the fence about, well, I think that's that. And then we have these little side conversations, those meetings after the meetings in the hallway of like, well, what are we committing to here? I don't know. So it gets very scattered. And so again, if you are the leader, what's important is it's up to you to make sure that understanding takes place. You can't say, well, I was the one telling them. They should have, if they had questions, they should have asked for them. The fact is, you are on the hook for the results, and you want to set your people up for success. So if you add in tools and systems and fail-safes like asking for a receipt, you're much more likely not to be led off into the land of mist and misunderstanding.
I love the concept of asking for the receipt. And yes, I remember the drive up. As a matter of fact, I was a car hop at a KFC restaurant, a car hop. Yeah, I don't know if people remember the days when you actually had a car hop that brought out the tray, put it on your windshield, right? And had you eat the food while you were sitting there.
Amazing. Yeah.
I digress. No. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some practical tools that people can easily implement and use better to actually help them better communicate? What are some of those?
Okay, well, we've covered a couple, right? So first of all, giving the big picture up front is a huge one. We talked about that one. Having a clear central message, editing your stuff, then asking for a receipt is another really useful one as well. And then the other really useful communication tool is to consider, and this is funny because oftentimes we think of communication as talking, when in fact, sometimes the best way to lead is to lead by listening and by asking an open-ended question of somebody, which could be such as, what's on your mind, or what's going on, and just really being present and listening with purpose. Unfortunately, too many of us don't really listen fully. For one thing, many of us are multitasking or distracted, or we're listening because we think we already have the answer. And so what I invite all of us to do is to continue to try to cultivate curiosity, is to really be curious and say, hey, like, how could this be better? Or asking people, within communication, you could say, what feedback do you have for me? Another thing, I was just interviewing a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company last week, and he does town halls and roundtables consistently, and he uses the same three questions all the time. First, he says, so what's going well? What's working well? Second question is, what's not going so well? And his third question is, if you were in my job as CEO, what's the one thing you would change? And he asks the same questions consistently. And I think, you can adapt those questions for your own uses, but basically, so many of us suffer from what we sometimes call CEO disease, right? No one wants to tell the boss bad news, but if you create an environment where people feel safe and trusted enough to be open about what's really going on, and you then consistently ask for, and then as importantly, you then act on the feedback that is shared, that is going to go miles and miles in the right direction. I'll tell you another quick funny thing about that CEO I mentioned about the three questions. So when he came in about 3 years ago into his position, the company was not doing well at all, and employees were not happy. So he came in and he said he went to all the Glassdoor reviews, which had been posted about the company. And he told me 511 to be precise. And when he had his first town hall as the CEO with the employee, he said, please, here is my cell phone. Here is my email. If you have feedback, please contact me directly, because frankly, if you give it to me, I can do something about it. But if I read about it in Glassdoor, there's nothing I can do about it. So I think in terms of communication, showing people, and not just saying it once, but visibly showing people and demonstrating that you want to hear what they have to say, opens up the lines of communication, because there's a big difference between misunderstanding and misunderstanding. And let me clarify what I mean by that. So let's say you and I are in a meeting, and we're talking about that we're going to roll out this new thing, and we're going to ship out 90 cases of this. And for whatever reason, I thought you said 19 cases, so I put in an order and I shipped out 19 cases. Like, oh, we had a misunderstanding, right? You said 90, I thought 19, and hopefully we can catch that. That is one kind of lack of understanding, misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is when, let's say you and I work together, Ann, but because you don't feel safe around me, you don't feel, I say psychologically safe, that you don't feel trusted, respected, whatever reason, that when I say, does anyone have any ideas on how to make things better? You don't tell me. And the sneaky thing about misunderstanding is I'll never know that it existed, because we don't know what we don't know. And that's scary, right? So just realize most of the times that we're trying to catch and correct when we have issues around communication, it's around misunderstanding stuff. But the bigger issue is, are people actually comfortable to speak up? And are we engaging in the kind of rigorous, important debates that we need to have around ideas to make things better, whether that's our processes, our tools, whatever that is? So again, to recap this a little bit, is what are you doing to make sure you're creating an environment that is two-way, that people are giving you the feedback that you need desperately to make good decisions?
And then I'm just going to add in doing that consistently, as you mentioned earlier. So, the CEO is really doing consistently, asking the same questions. So those questions, no matter how big or small your business is, you can even ask those questions of your family members. These are questions that you could really leverage in a lot of different ways, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I so appreciate what you say about this idea of consistency. The fact is, as all of us hear this stuff, as you're listening to this right now, you're like, yeah, I know, I get it. I was just working with a group yesterday. I'm working with a company in the manufacturing industry, and we were talking about leadership in general and saying that it's one thing if a leader demonstrates something every so often, but just think about when people are inconsistent, it really sends a strong message, because ultimately, if you don't do this stuff consistently, and you can understand it conceptually, but if you're not doing it consistently, that sends a message. And the message is you don't walk your talk because you say it's important, but you're not doing it. And ultimately, how that leads, it shoots your credibility big time, right? Because one of the big keys to credibility is you do what you say you're going to do. And if you only listen every so often or ask for feedback every so often, don't act on it, it sends a message, which is you're not very credible. And that erodes trust. And when we have low trust, people start to disengage, they disconnect, and obviously performance suffers as well.
Absolutely. So what are the communication traps that many people seem to consistently, I'm going to use that word again, fall into?
Yeah, well, there's probably the biggest one, and I'll share this one with a little story. It's not in a work context, but I think everyone will get the point, and I'm sure you've probably experienced something similar. So I happen to live in Western Massachusetts, a little town called Northampton. And for the story, you need to know that our house does not have a garage, but it has a driveway that is only wide enough for one car that then widens out at the end where we can park two cars side to side. So if you can visualize that. So, and we are a two-car family. So when friends come to visit and they bring their car and they park behind ours, they essentially block our two cars in. That's kind of this context because our friends a couple of years ago, Pam and Charlie, came to visit us from Washington, D.C., and they parked their car behind our two cars, which is not an issue. It's just if we have to get out, we just do a little car juggling, as I'm sure many people have experienced, juggling a car to get out. So it turned out that on the Sunday of their visit, I needed to fly out from the airport. So I needed to take my car to the airport to leave for a keynote speech I was giving. And so I said to Pam, hey, Pam, could you please move your car? I have to go to the airport. And she said, where should I park? I said, go park your car out in front of the house. And she said, you sure? I said, yeah, Pam. She said, you want me to park my car in front of the house? I said, yeah, Pam. You sure? Again, this goes back and forth a couple times. Yeah. And so she's like, fine. I'll go and park my car in front of the house. And there's only three of us in the room with her. And she's sort of declaiming this like really loud. Okay, I'm going to go park my car in front of the house. I'm thinking to myself, like, what's up with Pam? That was a little strange. So I didn't think anything else of it. Then I get my suitcase and I put it in the trunk of my car. And so as I start to slowly back my car down in reverse out of the driveway, I'm looking in the mirror and then something weird kind of catches my eye. And I realize, oh my gosh, is that Pam's car? She has parked her car in front of the house, not on the curb in front of the house, but like directly in front of the house, as in on the flower beds right in front of the house. And in that moment, I went, oh my gosh, Pam, the reason she was asking me that question over and over again is she was taking my words literally. When I said in front of the house, she literally couldn't translate out. When I'm in my mind, I'm thinking in front of the house could only mean one place, which is on the curb in front of the house. Now, again, I study communication, and in that moment, I had fallen into this trap, which is what psychologists call it the bias of other people are in your head. That's not actually the words they use. I'm trying to think the actual name. I'll come up with it and come back to it. Is that basically it's that you think that other people are thinking the exact same thoughts and feelings you are. And if you think about this for a moment, all right, it's just if you ever catch yourself saying sentences that start like this, don't they realize that, right? You're like, we're like, I can't believe that senior leaders don't realize that, or can't they understand? It's like, because in your mind, it's crystal clear. But for other people, it isn't clear. Oh, I thought of the name of it again. Thank you. It's called the projection bias. Basically, you're projecting your own version of understanding onto other people. And so the way to eliminate that is to obviously check your own assumptions, and that when it's important is to make sure you're doing an understanding check, asking for a receipt, clarifying, getting specific. But that is one of the biggest traps that people fall into around communications, that we assume that other people get it when they don't get it. I like to say that human beings are very good at many things, but reading minds is not one of them. So that's why we have to do things like asking for a receipt, checking in, doing things like that. So that's just a good example of one of the traps that we fall into with communication.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could read minds? Well, maybe on the other side, maybe not.
Yeah, it depends whose mind you're reading for sure, right?
Exactly.
And thanks.
Exactly. Many times you hear probably from staff as well as leaders, there's too many meetings or the meetings take too long. So how do business owners and their team members simplify meetings and more quickly get to the desired outcomes so we don't any longer hear, oh gosh, another meeting, or these meetings just waste my time, etc.
Right, exactly. So one of the things to consider meeting is a catch-all term for basically any time a bunch of people come together. Right? So if you stop and think about it, there's a whole bunch of different types of meetings. And unfortunately, a lot of times people show up to meet and they're really not clear on why we're meeting. And that's not even including the fact that there's an agenda, right? So for one thing, first of all, have an agenda. But it's also not enough to say, like, our agenda is the budget, right? Because what about the budget? What are we doing? So again, this is that extra level of thinking you need to do up front. So the meeting could be around, I am explaining what the budget for next year is. Now, one of the things is if you ever catch yourself saying, okay, the point of this meeting is a status update to share information with people, well, in that case, you should just give everybody a ribbon that says, I survived a meeting that should have been an email, right? Anytime if only the reason to meet is to have one-way dissemination of information, meetings are a giant waste of time. Because who wants to sit through, like, tell? You could have just emailed me this. I could read it on my own time, my own way, and keep it simple, right? So first of all, that is not a good reason to meet if it's only one-way dissemination of information. Now, a lot of other reasons to meet might be you want to gather input and perspective on stuff. So for example, going back to this, we're looking at this year's budget. I want to gather input so we can make some decisions around this. Now, you want to be clear on, I am gathering input from you. We are not going to making any decisions, right? That might be a completely different meeting. Unfortunately, so often these things get morphed and they kind of fuse together and it gets really messy and people are not clear on what we're trying to do. So what is the purpose of our meeting? Are we making decisions? Are we taking action? Are we getting input from different people? Are a couple of experts coming in to inform us so that we can make a decision later, or it's going to shift our thinking? You want to clarify all that stuff. So that's one whole area that's just focused on content and decision making. The next thing is to consider with meetings is, who are you inviting and why? You know, so often I think in so many organizations, I see there's this, oh, well, we've got to invite everybody because we don't want anyone to feel excluded, you know, and another side of it is like people get invited and they realize that they really don't need to be there, but I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So if I say no, like, time out. Like, if your company said, all right, everyone, well, we've got $10,000 this month and we're going to flush it down the toilet, you'd all stop and go, like, that's crazy. But hold on a second. Why is everyone okay with taking all these hours of time and flushing them down the toilet? If you could think about that in the same way, then suddenly you'd be a lot more vigilant with your meeting hygiene, frankly. So that's a couple of areas to think about. The other area within meetings to consider too is making sure that your meetings are well run. So there's, you know, in terms of meeting hygiene, for example, who is leading the meeting? Are they facilitating? Sometimes if you have the leader is also the facilitator, it can run into a problem because they have too much of an invested interest in the content and they're not able to really keep track of the process. So for example, when I come in and I do facilitate meetings for people, I'm really clear on how much time are we allotting for things? Also, do you have a timekeeper in your meetings? Are you trying to do that yourself, or do you run out of time? Do you allot each agenda item in a certain amount of time after which you're going to make a decision about what you're going to do with that? Another thing is, do you have a scribe to capture ideas, or are these a bunch of ideas that people talk about and then the meeting ends and they all disappear into thin air? So these are just a few examples. In my book, I write all about a whole bunch of things about meetings and emails, which are the biggest two. I call them the two-headed hydra that really are the biggest time sucks in people's lives these days. And I think if you start to claim those times back, it's amazing what that'll do for your effectiveness. So those are just a few examples of things you can do to improve your meetings.
Absolutely. I mean, having an agenda is, you think, is just so simple, but yet so many people don't create an agenda for the meeting, and then sharing that with the participants who will be there to allow them the opportunity to also bring either input or questions that they've prepared. So they think in advance about, hey, maybe I want to know something about this, or maybe I have some input about this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the whole idea of, can you prep people in advance? Because again, remember, not everyone is a great extemporaneous thinker. So you may want to give people a day or two or whatever it is, time to reflect on the subject matter so they can show up in their best self. And because the point of a meeting is not a gotcha. The point of a meeting is, let's meet so that we can move this process forward in some way. And yeah, people need to realize that. And the other thing that I think as leaders we have to be really clear on is that let's say we have a clear agenda for our meeting and someone starts to throwing out an idea that's completely not to do with our agenda. You have to, and again, you do it politely, like, hey, I hear you, and I hear that, and that is not the purpose of this meeting. Let's table that for another time and take it offline or something, but it is not, and have the courage to set a boundary. And I think too often leaders are like, well, and then before you know it, we're down this rabbit hole talking about this tangent, and then everyone's going, wait, what the heck are we doing? Another thing to do as you do that, and this is true in meetings as well, is sometimes meetings devolve where, let's say you have a meeting of 7 people, and then ultimately you're talking about something that only 2 people are involved in. And then the other 5 are sitting there going, what the heck am I doing here? This is really awkward. Can I get up and leave? So it's just consider who's meeting, why are you meeting, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Streamline, so much more efficiency. I think everybody would be happy with that.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've mentioned your book a couple times. How would someone get a hold of your books or other resources that you might have, Alain?
Yeah, thank you. I think the easiest place to go for like all resources is go to my website, which is alainhunkins.com, ALAINHUNKINS.com. And then from there, there's subpages. There's a page for the book. You can download a chapter for free. You can order it from your favorite book retailer or online. You can also there's links to a ton of other podcasts I've been on and articles. I write articles for Forbes. There's links to all sorts of resources there. You can also sign up for my monthly newsletter. And I run a 30-day leadership challenge 3 times a year. So depending on when you're listening to this, there may be one coming up. But yeah, and feel free to also reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. I do respond and I have a pretty active presence there. And you're also welcome to shoot me an email if you have any other questions, which is my first name, Alain, at alainhunkins.com.
Awesome. Any other last thoughts you'd like to share?
Just to everyone out there, leadership is a journey, right? It's a process. It's not an event. And I think the most critical skill is the willingness to keep learning how to learn. And the basis of that is growth mindset and humility. And as one of the CEOs I interviewed yesterday said, he said, I hate to be blunt, but it's not about you, stupid. It's about them. And the fact is, if you can basically support those around you to succeed, you're going to reap the benefits of it. And if you keep the direction that way, you're setting yourself up for success.
So true, so true. Again, I appreciate you sharing your very valuable time with us.
That's my pleasure. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, my hope for our time together with Alain is that you got value in an idea or 2 or even 3 that will help you be even more successful professionally and personally. Feel free to share my podcast with others, as it can be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries, and of course at accountabilitycoach.com. And if you'd like to get a short daily fix from me, subscribe to the Accountability Minute, which can also be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries. And remember to subscribe to my business success tips and resources blog by going to accountabilitycoach.com/blog. And always aim for what you want each and every day. Until next time, make it a great day, today and every day. I appreciate you listening.